I wanted to talk to you today about creative confidence. I'm going to start way back in the 3rd grade at Oakdale School in Barberton, Ohio. I remember one day my best friend Brian was working on a project. He was making a horse out of the clay that our teacher kept under the sink. And at one point, one of the girls that was sitting at his table, seeing what he was doing, leaned over and said to him, "That's terrible. That doesn't look anything like a horse." Right? And Brian's shoulders sank, and he wadded up the clay horse, and he threw it back in the bin. I kind of never saw Brian do a project like that ever again. And I wonder how often that happens, you know? It seems like when I tell that story of Brian to my class, you see, a lot of them want to come up after class and tell me about their similar experience, how a teacher shut them down or how a student was particularly cruel to them. And they some kind of opt out of thinking of themselves as creative at that point, right? And I see that opting out that happens in childhood, and it moves in and becomes more ingrained even by the time you get to adult life. So we see a lot of this. You know, when we have a workshop or we have clients in to work with us side by side, eventually we get to the point in the process it's kind of fuzzy or unconventional. And eventually these big shot executives whip out their BlackBerries and they say they have to make really important phone calls and they head for the exits. And they're just so uncomfortable. When we track them down and ask them what's going on, they say something like, "I'm just not the creative type." But we know that's not true. If they stick with the process, if they stick with it, they end up doing amazing things. And they surprise themselves just how innovative they and their teams really are. So I've been looking at this kind of fear of judgment that we have, you know, that you don't do things, you're afraid you're going to be judged. If you don't, you know, say the right creative thing, you're going to be judged. And I had a major breakthrough when I met the psychologist Albert Bandura. I don't know if you know Albert Bandura, but if you go to Wikipedia, it says that he's the 4th most important psychologist in history. You know, like Freud, Skinner, somebody in Bandura. Bandura is 86, and he still works at Stanford. He's just a lovely guy. And so I went to see him because he's just worked on phobias for a long time, which I'm very interested in. He had developed this way, this kind of methodology that ended up curing people in a very short amount of time. Like in 4 hours, he had a huge cure rate of people who had phobias. And we talked about snakes. I don't know why we talked about snakes. We talked about snakes and fear of snakes as a phobia. And it was really enjoyable, really interesting. He told me that he'd invite the test subject in, and he'd say, "You know, there's a snake in the next room, and we're going to go in there." And to which he reported that most of them replied, "Hell no, I'm not going in there." Certainly if there's a snake in there. But Bandura has a kind of a step-by-step process that was super successful. So he'd take people to this like two-way mirror looking into the room where the snake was, and he'd get them comfortable with that. And then through a series of steps, he'd move them, and they'd be standing in the doorway with the door open, and they'd be looking in there, and he'd get them comfortable with that. And then many more steps later, kind of baby steps, they'd be in the room, they'd have like a leather glove, like a welder's glove on, and they'd eventually touch the snake. And when they touched the snake, everything was fine. They were cured. In fact, everything was better than fine. These people who had lifelong fears of snakes were saying things like, "Look how beautiful that snake is." And they were holding it in their laps, right? Bandura calls this process guided mastery. I love that term, guided mastery, right? And something else happened. These people who went through the process and touched the snake ended up having less anxiety about other things in their lives, right? They tried harder, they persevered longer, and they were more resilient in the face of failure. right? They just gained a new confidence. And Bandura calls that confidence self-efficacy, right? The sense that you can change the world and that you can attain what you set out to do. Well, meeting Bandura was really cathartic for me because I realized that this, famous scientist had documented and scientifically validated something that we've seen happen over, for the last 30 years, that we could take people who had the fear that they weren't creative, and we could take them through a series of steps, kind of like a series of small successes, and they turned kind of fear into familiarity. And they surprised themselves. The transformation is amazing. We see at the D School now all the time. People from all different kinds of disciplines, they think of themselves as only analytical. And they come in and they go through the process, our process, they build confidence, and now they think of themselves differently. And they're totally emotionally excited about the fact that they walk around thinking of themselves as a creative person, right?
And what I'm saying is that culturally, we need a much better balance. We need more of a yin and yang between these two types. This is especially important when it comes to creativity and to productivity, because when psychologists look at the lives of the most creative people, what they find are people who are very good at exchanging ideas and advancing ideas, but who also have a serious streak of introversion in them. And this is because solitude is a crucial ingredient often to creativity. So Darwin, he took long walks alone in the woods and emphatically turned down dinner party invitations. Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, he dreamed up many of his amazing creations in a lonely bell tower office that he had in the back of his house in La Jolla, California. And he was actually afraid to meet the young children who read his books for fear that they were expecting him to be this kind of jolly Santa Claus-like figure and would be disappointed with his more reserved persona. Steve Wozniak invented the first Apple computer, sitting alone in his cubicle in Hewlett-Packard, where he was working at the time. And he says that he never would have become such an expert in the first place had he not been too introverted to leave the house when he was growing up. Now, of course, this does not mean that we should all stop collaborating. And case in point is Steve Wozniak famously coming together with Steve Jobs to start Apple Computer. But it does mean that solitude matters, and that for some people, it is the air that they breathe.
So this is a real human brain. This is the front of the brain, the back of the brain with the spinal cord hanging down. And this is how it would be positioned inside of my head. And when you look at the brain, it's obvious that the two cerebral cortices are completely separate from one another. For those of you who understand computers, our right hemisphere functions like a parallel processor, while our left hemisphere functions like a serial processor. The two hemispheres do communicate with one another through the corpus callosum, which is made up of some 300 million axonal fibers. But other than that, the two hemispheres are completely separate. Because they process information differently, each of our hemispheres think about different things, they care about different things, and dare I say, they have very different personalities. Excuse me. Thank you. It's been a joy. Our right human hemisphere is all about this present moment. It's all about right here, right now. Our right hemisphere, it thinks in pictures, and it learns kinesthetically through the movement of our bodies. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what this present moment smells like and tastes like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. I am an energy being connected to the energy all around me through the consciousness of my right hemisphere. We are energy beings connected to one another through the consciousness of our right hemispheres as one human family. And right here, right now, we are brothers and sisters on this planet, here to make the world a better place. And in this moment, we are perfect, we are whole, and we are beautiful. My left hemisphere, our left hemisphere, is a very different place. Our left hemisphere thinks linearly and methodically. Our left hemisphere is all about the past, and it's all about the future. Our left hemisphere is designed to take that enormous collage of the present moment and start picking out details, and more details about those details. It then categorizes and organizes all that information, associates it with everything in the past we've ever learned, and projects into the future all of our possibilities.
Creativity takes courage. This is a quote by Henri Matisse, who is an artist. And I would agree that creativity takes courage, but it also takes awareness and practice. Lots and lots and lots of practice. Now, I think all of us would agree that to become masters at something or even decent at something, it takes some practice. Whether you're a basketball player or whether you're a public speaker or an artist, practice is key. It takes some time and effort. We practice for automaticity. So great musicians still practice scales. Basketball players still practice free throws. And they do this so that when they are in a situation where there's thousands of screaming fans or they're up on a stage, those fundamentals happen almost subconsciously. And creativity also requires practice. It's not something that's just bestowed upon the lucky winners of the genetic soup. Creative practice actually begets more creativity.
This activity is designed to get your creativity flowing by uniting both your left and right brain. I begin every creative session with this whole brain exercise. Pick up a marker with each hand, and on a clean sheet of unlined paper, begin drawing with both markers in a mirror fashion, starting in the middle of the page. This may feel a bit awkward if you have never used your non-dominant hand in this way before, but with a little practice, it will begin to feel like both hands are dancing with each other on the paper. Be sure to stay focused on keeping your hands drawing in a symmetrical mirror fashion. If you are feeling stuck, notice which hand is trying to lead. Consider allowing the other hand to lead for a while. Or perhaps close your eyes for a moment and simply feel the balance you are creating with your hands. Bring this drawing to a close, and on a clean sheet of paper, begin drawing the same thing with each hand. If the left hand is drawing a line from right to left, then the right hand is doing the same. Don't be too concerned if the drawings look different from each other. This is simply an activity to get the left brain and the right brain working together. Again, if you feel stuck, simply allow the other hand to take the lead for a while until you feel a sense of balance returning. Now bring this drawing to a close, and on another clean sheet of paper, let your hands move the markers wherever they feel like going. Allow both hands to have their say, and to move wherever they feel like. Imagine that they are dancing with each other in a playful, flowing fashion. Now, in a mirror fashion, with both hands, write your name. Feel free to carry on this activity as long as you feel like. This exercise is ideal for moments when you are feeling stressed or off kilter, or when you are simply needing to get back to center.